Do you like adding colour to die cuts with ink blending? Today I'm sharing a quick and easy way to do it. Hello there, Michelle Shorts here with Terrific Tags with Michelle. Today I have a tag to share with you adding colour to die cuts with ink blending. So let's get started. I've started off by die cutting the layers from the Crafty Flower African Daisy layering die set. This is such a pretty set. There are 3 layers to each of the flowers. I'm actually just using 2 of the flowers, but there are also some flower centres, some stems and leaves as well, but I'm not using all of them today. I've die cut them from Classic Crest £110 solar white cardstock, and I'm using the sticky mat inside of the stamp wheel base, and I'm going to use that so that I can kind of stick the die cuts on, and they're going to hold them in place while I do my ink blending. So I've just placed all of those on the sticky mat. And then I can add some colour on top, and I'm using mini ink blending brushes, and I'm starting off with my lightest shade of pink from the Cherry Blossom Crisp dyeing collection, and this is Pinkalicious, and I'm just adding this colour towards the outside edges of these petals. You're not actually going to end up seeing a huge amount of this colour because I'm adding lots of layers onto these die cuts of the inks, but I wanted to have a base layer so that if I didn't end up having lots of kind of pink towards the outside edges of these petals, you are still going to have some colour. So it's not going to be completely white if I don't manage to add any more kind of pink to these edges, if that makes sense. So I'm going around all of these kind of edges of these petals with the Pinkalicious colour. And as you can see, I'm not being careful at all on how I'm doing the ink blending, and you'll see why a little bit later. I thought that I was going to go in with my darkest shade of purple, and I ended up going in with my lightest first, and this is Deep Iris from the Shades of Purple Crisp dyeing collection. And I'm adding that towards the centre of these petals. Again, I'm not being precise on how I'm actually doing the ink blending, and these 2 layers are actually going to help me with the ink blending itself. I'm going to get a much more kind of blended look between the 2 shades because I'm adding in these base layers. So I'm kind of finishing off here with this Deep Iris colour, and it looks so messy at the moment, but it is going to get better, I promise. I'm then going to go in with the Rubellite, which is my darkest shade of pink, and I'm basically going to pretty much go over where I've added that purple in. And when I add this in, it's going to blend the purple and the pink together. But again, I don't necessarily have to be too precise with the ink blending. Ordinarily, I do take my time with ink blending, trying to sort of get the transitions nice and blended together. But I found doing this kind of method of adding in base layers first means that I actually don't have to take too much time on it, and although I'm adding more layers, so that is taking the time, I'm not actually taking the time to do the ink blending itself, if that makes sense. So these came together really quite quickly. So I'm adding in that Rubellite here, and you can see that as I'm adding it in, it's just blending those colours together, but I am losing a lot of the purple, so I'm going to go back in with the purple and add that in afterwards. These layers here on the left hand side are going to pretty much get mainly covered up by the layers on the right hand side, so those ones in particular I'm definitely not worrying too much about the ink blending. So I'm now going in with Midnight Violet, and I'm adding that just towards the centre of these petals. And again, I'm not having to do too much sort of ink blending because I've got that really dark saturation of colour in the centre already. So I can just add this colour into the centres, and I think that that looks really nice, having the purple in the centre and then the pink on the outside edges. I am taking my inspiration for these colours from the June 2023 Inspiration Challenge. Deepa took a beautiful photo of some flowers, and there was some kind of like really vibrant purples, some vibrant pinks, and then also some white flowers. But instead of doing them separately and having like a purple flower and a pink flower, I thought I would combine them on the same flowers, and I think it looks really nice how it turned out. Because the sticky mat is photopolymer, the colours are going to stain this mat. I am using some stamp cleaner here just to get off any residual ink that's actually on the surface, but it is going to stain it a little bit. Now, personally, I don't like this. I'm not going to lie. I'm just that kind of person. I prefer to have things pristine clean, even though it does no harm to it whatsoever. So what I've decided to do is, because the sticky mats are now sold separately, I'm going to have one that I'm going to use for this purpose, like ink blending, because it's such a great way to be able to do ink blending. As you can see, pretty much the die cuts do stay in place. And then I'm going to have one that is pristine clean that I'm going to keep clean, and that's how I'm going to do it. So for these leaves, I'm using some vibrant greens. This is the Green Valley Crisp Dye Ink collection, and I'm using Firefly, Grassfield and Shadow Creek. And although this leaf here is moving a little bit because there's not a huge amount of surface area to kind of keep that in place, it was still much better than me adding adhesive or anything like that and sort of having to keep those in place. I then want to add a little bit of ink blending onto a scrap piece of white cardstock here that I'm going to use for my sentiment. So I'm using the same pinks that I used before from the Cherry Blossom collection, and I'm adding it a little bit darker towards one side of this piece of cardstock, just to get kind of like a little bit of an ombre look. I'm now going to adhere the petal layers together, so I'm using a bit of liquid glue in the centre of these petal pieces. And then I can adhere the layers one on top of each other. These layers are pretty solid, if that makes sense, so I can add a lot of adhesive if I wanted to onto the back of these layers, because they're not actually going to kind of overlap each other. But I wanted to have the edges of the petals not have any adhesive on them, so that I can kind of lift them up a little bit, and it's going to give a little bit of interest and dimension onto these flowers. You could definitely add the layers with foam tape. I think that that would work really nicely as well, but I like just having the centres of the flowers sort of stuck well together, and then having the outside edges of these petals sort of lift up a little bit. These flowers are pretty self-explanatory on how to actually adhere them together, but it has got the sort of layers on the back of the packaging, so you can see how they layer up together. So now I'm going to take my fingers and just kind of manipulate those petals a little bit to kind of lift them up. The glue isn't completely dry at this point, so you can see as I'm sort of moving these layers, you can see a little bit of the glue in between, but that's absolutely fine. There's enough glue sort of in the centre of these flowers to hold them together. I've then taken the tags and labels, the labels and tags to die set, and I've cut 2 tags using that set, and I've used that really beautiful shape. It's a really pretty shape. What is great about this set is that the holes of the tag are separate dies, so that if you didn't actually want to create them as tags, you could just use them as labels on a card base. You can do that, which is really quite helpful. But obviously I'm creating a tag today, so I did cut that hole in. I've cut 2 of the tags and I'm adhering them back to back. This is going to make it so that the back is nice and clean, and also give a little bit of stability to the tag as well. And then I'm just popping that whole reinforcer at the top. I can bring in my flowers, and I'm just kind of sort of seeing where I want them to be placed before I adhere anything down. I'm then going to take the leaves, and I decided to cut the bottoms of the leaves off, kind of like that sort of stem piece. And then I'm going to add some tape runner onto the back of these. I'm just again adding it towards the bottom of these leaves. Although these aren't going to lift up and they're also not really going to overlap the tag too much, I found that I didn't sort of want to have too much adhesive at the top, so if they kind of flipped up a little bit, it was okay because it just adds a little bit of dimension onto the tag. So I can just pop that leaf there at the bottom. A lot of that leaf is going to get covered up, but I just wanted to have a little bit more greenery there at the bottom. I can then take some instant dimension foam tape and add that onto the back of the flowers. So I can just pop this flower here in place, and I'm using tweezers just to help me out with the placement. And then I can pop some more foam tape onto the back of this flower, and I didn't add any on the left hand side because it is going to overlap the other flower slightly. So once I'm happy with the placement, I can press them down. I'm then taking the Wild Geranium Die Set. This die set coordinates with the stamp set in that you can use the shadow piece to cut out the stamped word if you wanted to, or you can just use the die set on its own, which is what I'm doing today. And I'm taking that little piece of cardstock that I added the ink blending to, and I've die cut that with the hello word. I'm then going to add these little letters onto the shadow piece. And I'm not going to lie, this was a little bit fiddly. They are really quite small in size, but I think it worked quite nicely for the tag. So I'm adding a little bit of liquid glue onto the back of the letters. And then I can pop them down onto that shadow piece. And then I can just finish up with the O here at the end. I've then added some more instant dimension foam tape onto the back of the sentiment, and then I can pop that down onto the tag. And then I thought, for something a little bit different, I thought that I would add enamel dots into the centres of the flowers rather than using the die cut layers. And that is the tag finished for today. Really clean and simple, but I love that dimension. You can see how much dimension you can get from these flowers. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Altenew blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Hey there, Lydia here. I really do hope that you've just enjoyed the video. If so, please subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you can get your daily dose of crafty techniques and tutorials just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.